Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from Fantasy Football Scout. My name is David and today I'm joined by the site's deputy editor Tom Freeman to discuss the team of the season, which is finally in. You guys have finished voting on the best players of the 2022-23 season and you have come up with an 11. So it's quite an exciting moment where we get to talk through the successful candidates. It's nice to have you with us, Tom. How are you doing? How did your season end in the end at the end of the campaign?
It was okay, David. It was hello. First of all, I didn't even introduce myself properly, but yeah, hello. Yeah, it was okay. Yeah, let's rewind. So I went into the final day and I was ranked about 45k, I think, and I didn't go down the route a lot of other people did with Kane coming in and possibly alongside Eze. I actually went for Watkins and Foden to try and go down a different route, and it didn't really work. So ended up just outside of the top 50k, but. Yeah, it was quite a challenging season for various reasons, but nowadays I'll take that rank. You know, it's not a bad rank at all, but hopefully can improve on that next season.
Yeah, well, it was a really challenging season, I think, for a lot of people.
Mm.
A lot of people who have fantastic records, which of course you are one, four, maybe five times in the top 1K. Is that correct? I always like to drop that in with you.
Yeah, five, but quite a few of those were a while ago. So I'm wary it's much more difficult
Wow.
these days. It's very difficult to rack up quite that many now. But it'd be nice to get another one, maybe six times top 1K has a nice ring to it. So I'll have to try a bit harder next year.
Yeah, not trying hard enough. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that could potentially help you get back to that particular rank is looking back sometimes at the season that's just gone, because we always discover some really interesting things after the fact, and sometimes that can help us discover them before the fact next time out. And so, yeah, that's very much been the purpose of the team of the season, hasn't it? And what's it been like, sort of looking back at the season? I know Mark's done a lot of the articles as well. We've had him on some videos. You've obviously been part of the editorial room looking at this. What's that process been like?
Yeah, it's great. Kind of like looking back, there's so many different parts of this season with the World Cup dropped into the middle that you kind of forget. So you kind of look back on, just starting with the goalkeepers. I mean, David Raya, the top scoring goalkeeper, but then you kind of forget the form that Nick Pope was in pre-World Cup. And the amount of clean sheets kind of Newcastle kept. So there's loads of little nuggets like that you kind of forget about. And it's crazy when the season's on, isn't it? It's deadline, double game week, and the way it finished. So it's nice to just take a step back, kind of reflect on it, look at those kind of key performers, and it'll be really interesting when the game launches to see how that impacts their prices. And of course, then we'll start having to look for bargains, because I can't imagine many of these guys are going to be priced similarly. They're all going to have an extra million or two probably added on, aren't they?
Yeah, that's the thing. And of course, when they make the team of the season on Fantasy Football Scout as well, that's always going to increase their stock with.
We don't help ourselves, do we?
No, no.
Yeah.
We should have put all the bad players in, although it might have made a difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you did mention David Ray, you mentioned Nick Pope as well. So let's start with the goalkeeper position, where
Yeah.
if you tell us a bit about who was involved in that vote, the 5 players on the shortlist, how the vote went, and who the winner was for that position.
Yeah, so we had 5 goalkeepers in the vote. We had Kepa from Chelsea, Alisson from Liverpool, De Gea from Man United, Pope from Newcastle, and Raya from Brentford. And Raya won by a bit of a landslide. He got 56% of the vote. Pope was second on just under 20%. So a huge amount of votes for Raya. And then in third was De Gea, fourth Alisson, and then fifth Kepa. Now Kepa came fifth. I was looking back at my season review. I actually played him more than any other goalkeeper across the season. But I can completely see why Raya came out on top of this one. Did you own it, Raya, at all throughout the season, David? Or...
The only Brentford player I owned in the whole season was Ivan Toney, and so I very much looking
Okay.
back at these season review videos, because Ben Mee obviously was shortlisted as well
Yeah.
for the defenders.
Yeah.
I go, why didn't I own any of them at any point? I think I maybe just was a bit too prejudiced based on them being Brentford, which is a very unreasonable attitude because they are doing very, very well. And I think I just overlooked them, I guess. But to be fair, I mean, I think Price came into it towards the end because they had a really strong first chunk of the season, to the point that I was worried I'd missed the boat, and I kind of felt that maybe Raya had just pushed himself out of the budget section. I was the same as you. Kepa was the goalkeeper that I played the most across the whole season as well.
Yeah.
And it felt like it just felt like a move that wouldn't get me as many points to make that switch, because goalkeeper transfers are difficult to make, aren't they? Really,
Yes.
unless you've got spare transfers. And so, but then that was still a mistake because it just kept on delivering. So it's that sort of thing that makes me think for next season maybe I need to jump on the defensive bandwagons as much as I jump on the attacking ones, because I had no qualms doing it with Tony. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's a good point though. I mean, the goalkeeper transfers, you don't tend to prioritise them. I actually bought Raya in on a wild card to prepare for a bench boost and paired him like loads of people did with Kepa. The only problem is when you've got those two goalkeepers, you often bench the points because Raya was just. I think I played Raya in most of the home games and he did well in those. I mean, Brentford are good at home. I mean, what's interesting is that Raya actually kept fewer clean sheets than the next three in the vote. Newcastle, United, and Liverpool kept more clean sheets than Brentford across the season, who kept 12. But what's great about Raya is the amount. No keeper had more save points. Nobody made more saves, and I don't think any big keeper got any more bonus either. I think he got over 20 bonus or around about that figure. And to think that he started at 4.5 million as well is incredible, really.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see if Raya's at Brentford next year. There's a lot of rumours linking him with United and Spurs, and maybe the new Brentford keeper they've brought in, Flecken, maybe he'll be worth a look next year if Raya does indeed depart, because Brentford are one of those perfect teams for goalkeepers, aren't they? They can see quite a lot of shots, but a lot of them are from outside of the box. Which is good for Raya. He's going to make more saves, racking them up that way. So they're a very good team for that. So it'd be really interesting to see where he ends up. And I mean, Raya, wherever he is, he certainly won't be starting at 4.5 next year.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, he definitely hits that sweet spot where he's not necessarily going to top clean sheets, but at the very least, when they do come, they're going to be pretty healthy. And then even when they don't keep the clean sheets, 3 or 4 points here and there just keeps them ticking along. I think you're right with this new goalkeeper, Flecken, which if you go to fantasyfootballscout.co.uk this morning, you will be able to see a nice little scout report on him to get a bit of extra information on how useful he's going to be to Brentford next season. Be interesting to see how he's priced, because he's got to have the Brentford defensive stability of this season factored into his price to some extent. But as you've already mentioned there, so much of how many clean sheets they kept was down to someone who might not be there. And so I don't know, do you think that Flecken's going to be a 5 million goalkeeper or 4.5? Or where would you, in a world where Raya's not there anymore?
It could depend on where Raya is when the game launches. If Raya has departed and we're suddenly thinking, well, Flecken is going to be the number one, then I think you would expect a 5 million price. But if Raya's still there and there's some doubt about Flecken being the number one, I mean, ideally it'd be priced up at 4.5 and then Raya would leave a couple of weeks later and we've got that route into that defence. We might get Brentford defenders at 4.5, and a lot of it is you look at a defence, don't you? And if Raya's say 5, but then you can get maybe like a Rico Henry or a Pinnock for 4.5, then you might go down that route. But having a goalkeeper from Brentford for next season, if they were 4.5, I think they're going to be very, very, very popular, aren't they?
Yeah, that's very true.
Because they're a very reliable defence, especially at home at the G-Tech. They don't lose many games there. So, I mean, if this vote, just to talk about the other options as well, if this vote would have been done the World Cup, I think Nick Pope would have won, wouldn't he? Because he was excellent in the first half of the season, but then a bit like Trippier, they kind of dropped off second half. But yeah, I don't think there can be any arguments with Raya being our top goalkeeper this season.
Yeah, I think so. And as I said right at the top of the video, that it's this sort of thing that makes me look back on my season and go, I should have gone down this particular route, because I personally overlooked him. And in a world where I had Pope for a bit, I had Kepa as well. I was going to ask you if you were surprised that Pope didn't win, but I mean, of course, you already addressed that. The drop off after the World Cup is really what did it, and that drop off never happened with Brentford. So, as you say, deserve.
Yeah, I did own Pope pre-World Cup, and he was doing very well for me. But of course, his price kind of rocketed a bit, didn't it? And then he was expensive. And I think when you, in the second half of the season, when you're building a squad for like a bench boost, then it's important. That was the appeal with Raya and Kepa. They were both sub 5 million. And you're already wary when you're building a bench boost team. You don't want too much on the bench each week, do you? So it made Pope quite a difficult own in that second half of the season. And that's why Raya was perfect when you pair him with somebody like Kepa.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on to defenders now. And there was a lot of options here. Three that made it into the team, Kieran Trippier, Ben White and Pervis Estupiñán, all on the screen right now. But it was quite tight, actually, in terms of, the red line that divided whether you did or didn't make it into the team. What was the story of that particular poll?
So Trippier came out on top with 26.18% of the vote, and I don't think that surprised anybody. He came just 2 points short of 200. It looked like he was going to hit that 200-point mark, but then last day of the season couldn't quite get over the line. But still, 198 points for a defender we forget who started the season at £5 million is absolutely excellent. And he was so far ahead of everybody else, wasn't he? And I give something like 40 points more than the second place defender, which is crazy, considering when you consider the fact that Trippier actually blanked in 14 of his last 18 or his final 18 appearances.
Could have smashed the record, couldn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, that just shows you how good he was first half of the season. I mean, it was every week he was returning, whether it be a clean sheet or an assist, sometimes both. So he was absolutely excellent. And looking back now, he was just a bonus magnet, wasn't he? Because every match he was just creating 3, 4, 5 chances for his teammates, and as soon as they kept a clean sheet, you'd be waiting for that 60-minute point, check the bonus, another 3, and it got to the point at the end where his effective ownership was just below 100. It was kind of, you weren't getting that much out of it, were you? But you had to have him because it was really going to hurt if you didn't. So we're going to see a price rise from him next year, aren't we? I mean, it wouldn't maybe 6.57 million. I'd expect something like that for Trippier.
Yeah, it's going to have to be, sadly, because the Newcastle defence, if it can get back to where it was in the first half of the season, because it really was just a clean sheet machine for quite a while, and even when it stopped happening, it was largely down to defensive errors rather than their team necessarily all of a sudden giving up lots of chances. So if they can keep that up, then I think 6.5 is a very fair price for a defender that could have smashed the record and might even do it next year. But I suppose the thing is, there's probably going to be more choices in the Newcastle defence next season, because you would maybe expect a fairly busy transfer window from Newcastle.
Yeah, and Champions League as well, when that kind of kicks in. Will they sign a backup for Trippier who can step into those home games which they're expected to win? Will he be quite as nailed on? I mean, he's always going to be a starter, isn't he? But they're going to have to manage some of their minutes a bit more than last year, I think, which we'll need to take into account. But great season for Trippier and an absolute no-brainer in the team of the season, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So who else have we got? So we've got Estupiñán, who was second in the vote, and he got 16%. He's a player that I know you had a lot of joy with, like many people this year, David. And what's interesting is he only averaged 3.7 points per match, but he started only at 4.5 million. I think he got 8 assists across the season. And of course, he finished the season very strongly. I mean, everyone remembers that haul at the Emirates, don't they, when he got the goal at the very, very end. And I think it's deserved. You owned him for a long time though, didn't you, David? It wasn't like you hopped on at the end. You had him pre-World Cup as well, did you, for a bit?
I think when I went back over my season, I signed him like game week 15 or 16. I think I just noticed enough of, on the eye test and a couple of stats as well. The stats I was more interested in were kind of like his penalty box touches and things like that. And of course, Brighton's defence was one that was worth having at the time. And I've always had a bit of an affinity for an attacking fullback. Budget defenders are something that just excite me, to be honest, because like they are the best value assets sometimes, and the positions he was taking up were just crazy. And so I was looking back on the cross whole season, and he's probably the player that I had the most joy with, even if he wasn't necessarily the person who got me the most points. It's players who you have who, if you can get ahead of the curve on them, you get to enjoy those hauls more than other people, which obviously sounds a bit mean, but this is a game where we've got to beat other people, so I shouldn't shy away from that.
No, it's absolutely true. I'll talk about it in the midfield section a bit, but I was exactly the same. I was looking back on season highlights and things, and Foden for me in the first half of the season, that's the player that I remember the most, because I was quite fortunate. I landed on his hat trick and things like that when other people didn't know, and then other people brought him in, and then he was suddenly benched in that typical Pep fashion. So it's players like that, and a Stupinan for you that we don't remember as much the Trippiers and things because everybody owned him. It's more these little players that you get where you feel like you're a bit at the head of the curve with them, and that's what FPL is about to me. Looking back on it, so again, a deserving player in the team of the season, I think, and he was followed by Ben White, who got 15% of the vote, so just behind. It was very, very close. And Ben White, interestingly, only just pipped Luke Shaw. It was 0.04% difference. So probably one more vote for Shaw might have just tipped it in his favour. But Ben White got in. And again, another 4.5 million starting defender from a very good defence. 156 points, I think he ended on. With Ben White, I didn't own Ben White this year. I got on Gabriel quite early. I kind of looked at some stats, and I liked his kind of goal threat from set pieces. So that kind of locked me into Gabriel. But Ben White, I mean, he had like a bit of an 8-point ceiling. I don't think he got over 8 points throughout the season, but he was just very consistent. And he surprised me in an attacking sense, that he actually got into some very good positions across the season. He's got that assist potential. He's got a bit of goal threat from set pieces as well, from getting in the box. And so he was a very good route into that defence, which again started the season and up to the point when they had a bit of a wobble was very, very reliable. So so White joins Stupinan and Trippier.
Yeah, well, I think it is that goal threat that I think is probably just what pushed him into that top three, because he had everything to always get something. Because I remember I never had Gabriel because I wasn't confident enough in the Arsenal defence until probably too late. And in my defence, it probably was the whole, do you trust Arsenal defenders? We've had that question for a long, long time, so it took me longer to be won over. So by the time I was like, okay, I'm getting done by the Arsenal clean sheet every week, I have to invest somewhere. Gabriel was already kind of out of my price point because he rose very quickly, as you said at the start of the season. And so Ben White was the natural one to go for. And I had lots of moments where I really enjoyed owning Ben White, because it would be in games because their defence in the end actually kind of reverted to form, you could say, in that they did start losing the clean sheets more often than they should, etc. But Ben White would just keep popping up. So, and actually, that's sometimes better if you've got Ben White and someone else has got Gabriel and someone else has got Ramsdale, and the clean sheet goes, and then White gets an assist or a goal. That's probably going to help you more than if all three of you kept the clean sheet. And so that was quite nice. As you say, the positions he took up were really interesting, because I suppose historically we're used to him playing centre back role. We've never really seen him bombing on as a fullback until this season, when especially at the Emirates as well. I feel like there was a lot of games where he would just go and live on the edge of the box, pop up with a header or a shot.
Camped in that zone, wasn't he? Yeah, kind of just outside the box and whipping in crosses, and he was a real good asset to own. And like you say, there was quite a few occasions when they lost the clean sheet. Then he would get an assist and a bit of bonus or something like that, and suddenly, that does more for your team than just having the clean sheet. Because a lot of Gabriel owners like myself, and he was the go-to route into that Arsenal defence for a lot of people, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, we should also talk about the other guys who just missed out, I suppose. You've talked about Luke Shaw, so perhaps a little word on him, and Trent as well. We're going to come back to their position in all this kind of, this game that we've been playing with the with the viewers, with their votes and things towards the end, with there was a bit of a playoff vote. But in terms of their season, I suppose Trent too little too late to really command a place in the top three, I suppose, and was sure it was very close. So
Yeah, I think Shaw was a good option. I mean, he had that period where he's moved to centre back, and that I think put a few people off at the time. But what interestingly actually did for Shaw is his bonus potential at the centre back position actually went through the roof then. So there was actually some pros to him playing there. I think he did keep a couple of clean sheets at centre back, and he scooped up the maximum bonus. You probably want him as an FPL asset at left back where he can get a bit more advanced, but it wasn't a terrible thing when he was centre back, and it was very, very close. Like I said earlier, probably a couple more votes and he would have been in. With Trent, I think you summed it up there. A bit too little, too late, but he finished so strongly, which coincided with Klopp shifting him into this kind of inverted role where he would out of possession, he would be right back when on the ball, and you would move infield and form this kind of double pivot alongside Fabinho. And he was incredible there. He got a lot of assists towards the end of the season. And I think that if that system sticks, which you fully expect it to, it's going to be the Trent of old next year that we get hopefully for an entire season. I think his price will probably be about 7.5 again. But I think a lot of people are going to go there because he's one of the best assets we've had in recent seasons, isn't he? But it was just Liverpool struggled for a lot of last year defensively, didn't they? And it was only when they shifted to that new system that it all kind of came together, and they had that late push for the Champions League. But I expect Liverpool next year will do a lot better across the season. I think they'll get back into the Champions League, and then Trent will be probably the go-to defender again next year, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the other thing is it just that shift into that sort of asymmetrical 3-2, or I think it is. Didn't really help Robbo.
3-2-5, yeah.
Yeah, it didn't really help Robbo.
It didn't. You're right.
Because he then became the left-sided centre half when they were in possession. So you're right. I think Trent definitely has probably a bigger advantage over Robbo than he's ever had, which is a shame because Robbo is a bit of a fantasy legend of old. He's a previous team of the season, Cluzy, I think is the word. But yeah.
It would be interesting if FPL, when they do their pricing, we don't want a 0.5 gap between them. But it'd be interesting if there was like 1 million or something like that. And depending on what the system throws up, there might be little tweaks to it. I think in the setup at the moment, it's very hard for Robertson to get forward as much. But it might just, if there was 1 million gap, it at least raises the question, doesn't it? So I think Trent will probably be worth it across the season. But yeah, if it's a 7.5 and a 7, then it's an absolute no-brainer to go for Trent. 1 million, and maybe we start to look at it a little bit differently. But I'm expecting a bigger season from him next season, more consistent across the whole thing. And then just below them, we'll mention it. We had Gabriel, who we've already spoken about, who had 5% of the vote. Ben Mee had just over 4%, and then Tyrone Mings and Fabian Schär as well, who completed it. But Trippier, Estupiñán, and White were the ones selected by the voters.
Yeah, and worthy inclusions on the list as well. So let's move on to midfield then, which I don't think I've ever seen so many midfielders from the same team all make the team of the season. But also the vote also for this one also very, very, very tight. There's no runaway winner. There's sort of like 5 or 6 players that have all sort of competed quite well with each other. And I mean, to be honest, when I looked at who was on the list, I was a bit like, I don't even know who I'm going to vote for myself, to be honest. And kind of looks like the voters kind of had the same attitude when they voted in this, because it's not good. It was a very close run thing.
It was the trickiest position, I think, because you kind of look down that list, and I mean, we've got Rashford, who came out on top with 18.45%, but just below him was Odegaard on 17.4%. Then you had Martinelli, his teammate, on 16.6%. Then you kind of had Salah on 12.5%, and then Saka was just under 10% of the vote. So 3 Arsenal midfielders. get thrown in, and then there's other good options. There's players like Matoma, Andres Pereira. I mean, I would have liked to seen him in there personally because of the value he threw up. And then below that there was De Bruyne, Almiron, McAllister, and Marsh, who were all under 5%, and maybe didn't do quite enough across the whole of the season. Almiron was obviously excellent pre-World Cup, and then went off the boil a little bit. McAllister, when he went into that number 10 role, was excellent, but maybe not quite as highly owned at the beginning of the season. But yeah, you kind of, I mean, it might be a first having three midfielders from one club in the team of the season, but it's hard to argue against any of them, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, when we were discussing those three players, me and Mark, I very much sort of came to the realization that the thing about the three of them was that there was a sort of an element of difficulty in terms of which ones of them to own in a season where you also needed a defender from that team as well. So you had to pick no more than two of that trio. And it was really, really difficult to get it right. There were a number of times when I had the wrong combination. I can think of one particular time when I sold Ødegaard to keep Saka because I wanted to keep the penalties, even though I was very aware of the fact. I think it was an away game, and I think Ødegaard was better away than he was at home. And I was like, I know, because I needed to get to Salah, was what I was trying to do. And I was like, I know this is going to bite me. I know that selling Ødegaard is going to go wrong, and it went wrong. And I feel like a number of people had. So I sort of wonder if that's how they ended up all being so clutched together. I mean, of course, they all had very similar points as well, but that's why I think the category was so close, because there was no. Well, I mean, there was only 5 midfielders in the whole campaign who were priced in what you would describe as premium, and so then there was only 2 really that were sort of, in and around the sort of 11s and 12s in Salah and De Bruyne. De Bruyne didn't have a mega season by his standards, still a pretty good one, and it was very much the season was a case of, in a normal season, I feel like we probably rotate around 1 or 2 slots in our teams that you would consider to be a mid-price to budget midfielder. But I feel like this season, like, it was like 4 midfield slots. It was like Salah and 4 other budget midfielders that you would rotate in and around off, which is why the category is so large. I mean, you've got McAllister, March, Almiron. All the 3 Arsenal midfield players were priced very kindly, with Saka a bit further ahead. But
yes.
And also, let's not forget that Salah wasn't really worth owning in the first half of the season. So really, the midfield category was the cheapest you could remember. And so then that's probably why this vote is, there's no standout winner, because we've all probably chopped and changed our midfield more than any other position, because Haaland was locked in. A lot of people stayed on Kane for a long time. Trippier was locked in. There was just lots of locks in lots of positions, and the midfield was a bit of a carousel, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it made it probably a bit too easy, I think, didn't it? Because we had these players like that Rashford, who started at 6.5 million, which is crazy. You had Ødegaard, who was 6.5 million as well at the start. Martinelli was even cheaper still. He started at 6 million. And then you throw in a Trippier who started at 5. And yeah, like you say, we didn't, Salah's made it in, and he was the top scoring midfielder, but you forget that he only scored 6 goals before the World Cup. So he was certainly not a must-own before that. He finished very strongly. I think he only blanked once in the last 11 games, I think it was. So a bit like Trent, as soon as Liverpool start performing, the system it works, then suddenly they're the players that we've been so reliable in the past. But yeah, Salah's a bit more dropped down, and it was those 6.5 midfielders which were so effective this year. I mean, Rashford was just excellent at Old Trafford, wasn't he? So consistent, great value. Ødegaard, I've always seen Ødegaard as this kind of creator type, this playmaker, but he actually added a lot of goals this year. Did he? I think he scored 15 he ended on, something like that. It might have even been more than that, but it was absolutely superb. And so he had this creativity and this assist potential, but with this added goal threat, he scored a lot of goals from outside the box, but also kind of just attacking the box, like, and kind of those Lampard-esque kind of late runs into the box, and then being on the end of crosses and scoring via that way. And he was excellent. And Martinelli, I mean, 6 million, he started really strongly. And then Trossard came, didn't he? And we all thought he was going to eat into his minutes and lose his place. And a lot of people sold him. And then he came off the bench against my team, Villa, and scored in like the 92nd, 93rd minute, something like that. And then he was back in the team, and he was suddenly like, he just went on this incredible run. I think Neil, our editor, I think that he had a massive boost up the rankings because he held on to him. And then people had just sold him, and maybe we were locked into Saka and Odegaard or something like that, and didn't want to go back to Martinelli. And the people that held on to him just had these huge rank rises because he got some absolutely monster hauls. And yeah, I mean, I think if I had to pick the two, I would probably pick Martinelli and Odegaard in the team of the season if you had to pick two, because I just think their starting prices and what they served up was excellent.
Yeah.
But then Saka, 26 attacking returns. I mean, it's not bad, is it? But it was penalties, wasn't it? That I think drew it. A lot of us were drawn into him because of that, which is completely understandable. It's that added penalties, and he got just over 200 points, didn't he? So it's not a surprise to see him in there as well. So yeah, triple Arsenal, Rashford and Salah in the five across the middle and the team of the year.
Yeah, so it was pretty formidable midfield, but as you say, the journey towards them all being selected was very dramatic, shall we say, with all those other names involved, which we can't quite say about the forwards. Because I'm pretty sure Erling Haaland locked himself into the team of the season after about game week 3, didn't he?
Yes, yeah. We didn't really need a vote on this one, did we? We should have kind of just put him in automatically. But yeah, incredible season for him. But Harry Kane as well. He finished only 9 points behind him in the end. Yes, he started more games than him. Yes, he had more minutes, but he was incredibly consistent, wasn't he, Kane? I think he blanked in 8 games, I think, across the season or something crazy like that. I think he returned in 30
Another 2 in a row, I think,
like
was the stat as well.
Yeah. And I mean, you could get to a threemium this year, couldn't you? You could have got to Salah, Haaland, and Kane as well. And because of the prices of those players, the cheaper players from Arsenal and Trippier's and things like that. And I hope next season that we're priced accordingly where that isn't a possible option. And if Kane is at still Spurs, will he be a Spurs player when we start in August, or will he have moved on? That's going to be interesting. I kind of hope he is at Spurs, because it will raise, which two do you start with then? It'll probably be fixtures based, wouldn't it? If out of Haaland, Salah and Kane, hopefully they're all there and we're faced with this decision, because it could make it interesting.
Yeah, I'm a bit nervous about the Kane saga over the summer. Not for any Spurs reason. I'm not a Spurs fan at all. It is for that exact reason you've mentioned there. I want there to be a bit of a choice for people. And if he does go, then it will just be Haaland and Salah, and then 9 other players that you start, which
build around that.
Doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, because I suppose the captaincy could potentially become a challenge, and we might even be able to start doing captaincy videos again on Fantasy Football Scout instead of them just being completely
nice, yeah. I've been made redundant in the past 6 months. So.
Yeah, which I actually think the way that Liverpool finished the season, maybe we could be back in a position where we do have to pick between, at the very least, Salah and Haaland in a world where Kane is gone. But if Kane is still here, then he's got every reason to be in that captaincy conversation. I mean, we sort of forgot about him in many ways, because he sort of he never smashed it. He was just very consistent, which is very weird for him, because I've always seen him as a bit of a boom and bust player, which is in no way a criticism. I've always enjoyed owning him because you could usually time it just right, because he's not a flat track bully by any stretch of the imagination, and I love him, what he does for Spurs and for England, so this isn't any criticism, but he is very reliable against the poorer teams, and then tends to chip in against the bigger teams. So you could usually look at the fixtures and go, okay, now is a time when Kane is going to get some big hauls. Whereas this season, there were fewer big hauls, but he just kept on delivering. And I think that's probably why he got overlooked, was because he was never like the top scorer in many game weeks, so he gets overlooked. It's only when you looked back over a 6 game week period, 8 game week period, and went, oh, actually he's basically outscored everyone apart from Haaland in this period. And so what's really fascinating about the Kane situation is I mean, I guess the question is, what was his value for the season? So I actually did start the season with Haaland, Kane, and Salah. That's how I started the season, and I went for a premium because I try to, where possible, have as many of the premiums in my team to begin with, so that I don't accidentally miss out on one. And then because it's easier to step away from a premium if they're not delivering than it is to break your whole team to get the one you don't have if the other two are already delivering. And so my front line was Haaland, Kane, and Jesus. And it was quite reliable because Haaland was doing Haaland things. Jesus was getting 6 or 7 points every game week, and was Harry Kane. Now, despite all of that, I had an awful first half of the season, and I went into the World Cup ranked 800k, and I was anticipating my worst ever finish. And I kind of just went, okay, when I came out of the World Cup, let's just take a few risks here. And one of the things I'd noticed was Kane wasn't smashing it enough, and I was never captaining him. So I took him out of the team, and I went for a slightly different forward line. It was Haaland and Watkins for quite a while. It was Haaland and Wilson for a little bit as well. And I just went for Haaland.
To join Tony for a bit as well, maybe.
Tony as well.
Had the double and.
Yeah, exactly. So I sort of played the fixtures with those other striker slots, and Kane was continuing to deliver, but I didn't have him. And weirdly, despite coming off the second highest scoring forward, in the end, taking him out of my team, I didn't bring him in again until the final day of the season. That's when my season just skyrocketed, and I finished nearly in the top 10k because I started to spread that cash. And I'm not trying to knock Harry Kane in any way, but I think that that's possibly the story of how he got a little bit overlooked, because I can't have been the only fantasy manager who looked at his returns and felt they weren't explosive enough in a world where you could own and captain Haaland or own and captain Salah, or even a Rashford or Fernandes who did very well as well. So weird season for Harry Kane, very strange season, but he still made the team of the season.
Yeah, I think the captaincy is key. I don't think a lot of people owned him because they were always going to go to Haaland for the captaincy. I mean, a lot of people started game week 1 with Kane over Haaland, didn't they? We forget that Kane was really popular. He started the season because he had that home game against Southampton, and Haaland went to West Ham. Haaland was coming off the back of a Charity Shield where it seems crazy now, but questions were being asked about him. And then he promptly scored a brace, I think, against at West Ham on the first weekend, and had a 0.1 price rise soon after, and everybody was scrabbling to try and get to him from Kane. But I mean, to think that Kane had this kind of season in what was a Spurs team struggling, which probably did affect his kind of double-digit haul potential, because Spurs weren't performing as well as they can do. They weren't scoring as many goals as they can do. So it's going to be really, if he is at the club next year, if he's playing under a new manager who is known to be more attacking, more front foot, could he step up another level and kind of, what did he finish on? Just over 260 points, wasn't it? So could he go beyond that if he's playing next year? Of course, Spurs don't have Europe either, so that helps. He's always played every game regardless, hasn't he? But he's gonna. It's not even possible, I don't think, but had to play more games. But he's gonna be super nailed on, which maybe won't be as much of the case when the Champions League teams at certain points. So I would like him to stay at Spurs next year, cause just from an FPL point of view, it'd be really interesting to see.
Yeah, or at the very least, if he can maybe stay in the Premier League and play for Man United rather than Spurs, because maybe might even do better. I don't mind where he is as long as it's an English club, so I can still own him in FPL, and so he can be priced accordingly and sort of force a few decisions. But speaking of decisions, then there was one big one that Fantasy Football Scout readers had to make in the end, which was we had, I think, 7 players that got filtered into a bit of a playoff situation. Which in effect is what decided the position. So, talk us through sort of where the decision to sort of run that poll came from and how it went.
Yeah, so it's an idea we introduced the season before, where we kind of locked certain the ones that have been heavily voted for or massively in front. We locked them into the team, and then we threw up another article where we had like a runoff vote, which dictated the formation that we would play, that kind of thing. Ones where the votes were a little bit closer, and we gave people that decision. We sometimes thought it would help the reader with that. If you've got these players like Haaland who are locked in, like Trippier, the obvious ones like David Raya and things like that. And then we gave people 7 other options for this runoff vote. Now, the players included were Kane, Martinelli, Saka, Salah, Tony, Shaw, and Alexander-Arnold. And Harry Kane, funnily enough, came out on top of that runoff vote with 24% of the votes. People wanted him in their team of the season. And then 3 other players joined him in that, with Martinelli, Saka, and Salah. And then the 3 players, I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen, but basically the 3 players that were kind of bottom of that runoff vote: Tony, Shaw, and Alexander-Arnold, who had 11%, 9%, and 4% respectively of the vote. They formed the substitutes bench of our team of the season. So they did very well, but just not quite enough to make it into that first 11. Tony's a player we haven't really touched on yet, but a very good season, consistent. Unfortunately, we're not going to see any more of him until January next year. But you can expect, once he is back from this ban, that he'll become an option for us with those wild cards for the second half of the season. And yeah, I mean, he's very, very consistent player, isn't he? And yeah, he was just ahead of Watkins in the vote as well. And Watkins, again, is that player who probably suffered from having a very strong second half, but not quite enough across the whole of the season. Under Gerrard, I think he only scored 3 goals. So yeah, Tony, I think 3rd best forward. I think that's fair enough call over the course of the season. But yeah, not quite enough to get into the 11.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing is it obviously makes for a 3-5-2, which is, I feel like this subtle shift to 3-5-2 has been happening over recent years. You know, I'm still a bit of a 3-4-3 purist. I always feel a bit wrong when I'm in 3-5-2, but it has been very effective this season for a lot of managers. So it's interesting to see that in the end is sort of how residually, because I don't think anyone necessarily was voting with the specific intention of making the team 3-5-2. It's just it's created one as a knock-on effect, but that probably is the story of the season.
Yeah, and I think it's the prices of those Arsenal players, but Brighton as well. You know, towards the end of the season, we kind of had to have 2 Brighton midfielders because of the volume of extra fixtures they had in double game weeks, didn't they? So that kind of made us shift towards that 3-5-2 kind of setup. We wanted 2 of Mitoma, McAllister, and Marsh in our teams. And so, yeah, the formation of the team of the season does reflect the way certainly it finished anyway, with our backing our midfielders. And maybe it'll be different at the start of next season. It probably will be. We might go down that 3-4-3, that more traditional kind of route. But yeah, it's completely dependent on the pricing structure which FPL give us whenever the game is launched.
Yeah, it's a bit of a crystal ball question at the moment, isn't it? We can't really, we just have no idea. We can guess. It's probably going to be like they try and go as soon as they possibly can to get a bit of interest in. So definitely keep an eye out on the Fantasy Premier League website and the Fantasy Football Scout website as well.
Yeah.
But we do have...
Just to say quickly, we've got fixtures, haven't we? We've got fixtures 15th of June.
Read my mind.
You're going to say that. So yeah. But let's see after that, 2-3 weeks after, we should have a game, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, you're absolutely right. The fixtures will be interesting. They're going to come on the 15th of June. They're going to come out at 9 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, keep an eye on Fantasy Football Scout for all of the sort of all of the lessons we've learned as quickly as we possibly can, because it's all a bit of a mad rush when the fixtures come out to assess all 38 games or 38 game weeks of the season, shall we say. Season ticker will obviously be live on that day as well. I mean, are you looking forward to the fixture release? I mean, there's still actually a lot of things you can kind of plan to do, because you can almost kind of guess what a lot of the prices are going to be. So it's an important date, isn't it?
Yeah, the fixtures are just absolutely key for me. It's very, you can speculate on player prices, but I've always been a manager who's been dictated by the player picks by the fixtures. So on Scout in the past week, we've been doing a lot of research on the newly promoted side, so Luton, Sheffield United, and we've got the Burnley articles to come, and we've been discussing players. I mean, the newly promoted sides are so interesting for me because it's, last year, Pereira and Mitrovic, and even players like Gibbs-White, who had an impact, and Solanke, some of us owned. Going back further, you've got your kind of FPL legends like Lundstram and things like that, and players who have come up and made such an impact. And I just hope we get an FPL which prices to players so that we do have to consider some of these options, and we have to be, I love that side of the game when you do have to kind of go to the newly promoted sides and maybe look out for a £4 million defender who might get a few starts in the first few weeks of the season, or a 4.5 or something like that. Now, last year we had Newcastle defenders at 4.5, we had Brentford defenders at 4.5, so there wasn't really a need to look at those type of players. But I would like it this year if we can, or if we're forced into going down that route, and maybe having one newly promoted player in our game week one team, something like that. So I can't wait. So we've got fixtures, like you say, middle of June, 15th of June. Then we can start even, you can speculate on player prices. Then you can start to get an idea of which premiums you might want to go, and then you kind of build around that. And then hopefully end of June, early July, whenever it'll be, we'll get the full game launched, and we'll have 4 or 5 weeks of tinkering time, maybe, where we can build endless drafts, arrive on something completely different 24 hours behind deadline, and then see how it goes. But I'm really excited about it already, to be honest.
Yeah, it's going to be good. And well, one thing that will be handy for people to do, if they haven't done already, is to subscribe to the Fantasy Football Scout YouTube channel. Make sure you like this video as well, so that we know that you want more content like this. It's been a lot of fun doing the team of the season, I think, for everybody. So an opportunity to get everybody excited about that is always good. So make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification as well, because especially during the summer when you haven't got those game week deadlines sort of keeping you awake in fantasy terms, those notifications to your phone to let you know that something big is happening in the fantasy world via the Fantasy Football Scout YouTube channel will I no doubt be very useful. So make sure you click that and activate that as well. We've got other content as well on the channel, so if you want, you can always go back and have a look at them in more in detail on each of the different positions for the team of the season that we did with Mark recently. We've also interviewed the most recent winner, FPL Guns. You can find him on Twitter, and he even came 215th the previous season, so this guy knows what he's talking about. So watch out for big things for him. It was a good interview there. I mean, did you have a chance to catch that, Tom? It was good value, wasn't he? It's exciting to see what the future holds for him.
Yeah, and we've actually got part of the interview going up on the site as well. It'll either be today or tomorrow. We've transcribed some of it, and some really good insight in there, because this isn't just a player, like you say, who's come off and just had one excellent season and then it's surrounded by average seasons. He's had two incredible seasons, finishing 200 and what was it, 15th in the world. He finished the one before that. Absolutely amazing. So I'm always interested to see what these guys have got to say, and the strategies behind it, and the involving chips and things like that, and how did they come to their captaincy decisions, or their decisions to buy player A, player AB. And it's always really fascinating, and it's the stuff we can only dream of, isn't it, winning FPL? And so true. It's just great to hear, and hopefully we'll hear more from FPL Guns on the lead up to the new seasons, and maybe he can share a draft or two with us or something, and you can see what he's thinking and the players he's targeting. So absolutely, incredible couple of seasons.
Yeah, well, if you haven't had a chance to check that out, make sure that you do, because you will certainly learn a lot. But with that, I will leave you guys to enjoy the rest of your summer, and we will see you the next time we are live. We'll speak to you soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks, David. Yeah, see you soon.